Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you're having a good week. It's been a rather busy one for me, but I did get some positive news in the search for a new home. Still waiting to see kind of how it rolls out, what happens, but it looks like my search may be over, so that is a good thing. Unfortunately, it's looking more and more like World War III may be on the menu, and I may not get to enjoy anything about a potential new home. So, we'll see what happens. Russia is still waging war in Ukraine, and to most outside of the country, or at least outside of some limited circles, it looks like things are not exactly going so well for the Russian military. Increasingly, we are seeing Russian vehicles being abandoned in single or in pairs, all over the countryside. In fact, it's getting so bad that there are farmers in the Ukraine who may have better anti-air systems than some small countries. It's crazy, and I can't say that I've seen anything like it before. I have to imagine, me personally, I haven't seen it, but I have to imagine after World War II, there were some similar situations in Europe and maybe, the South Pacific or something like that, for decades. I imagine that there were old tanks and trucks and vehicles just parked in barns or converted to tractors and things like that. It's really crazy over there right now, but that's the kind of stuff that's going on. So this week, a couple of big things to come out was something that began to bubble up late last week. It started to really appear after I had worked on the show for last week, and honestly, I was very skeptical of the initial claims because of what looked very much like some malinformation, not disinformation, but malinformation that was spreading with this report. What I'm talking about is a report that the U.S. was funding and supporting bio-research laboratories in Ukraine. Now, let me explain how, I saw this all go down, how it played out, at least for me. Your experience may have been a little bit different, but I first saw this coming out of, like I said, a very suspect source, someone on the internet that I had not heard before. It was some tweets or some posts and accompanying graphics and whatnot. And this person was saying that they had been digging into some information and came across this unexpectedly. Now, that's a good sounding story, but there's, of course, no way to verify this. This source presented information which included a map that reportedly showed the locations of what they termed bio-research laboratories. And the map was the thing that I was very, very suspect about. I'm not going to show the map because I believe that it is actually incorrect and it does not, accurately depict where these labs are. I still think that is disinformation or malinformation. The corroboration for this information was supposedly on the State Department's website. Now, I just kind of sat on this for a day or two, just kind of marinating on it, I guess you would say. I didn't really say much about it and didn't really offer too many comments or anything on Gab or whatnot. I was skeptical of the map due to the fact that it showed over 20 locations. It was like 25, 26 locations, and at least two of them were in areas that were very questionable. One was situated right on the mainland across the causeways from Crimea. Crimea is an island, I guess you would call it a peninsula. It's surrounded by some like marshy areas and lowlands and whatnot, and there's some small causeways, very thin causeways that connect it to the mainland, kind of on both sides of it. And one of these, this map was showing one of those labs right there in that space. Now, Crimea has been under the control of Russia for many years, and before these labs were supposedly built. And then there was a second lab that was in the middle of the Donetsk Republic, which is one of the breakaway states that has been at war with Ukraine for years. And it just doesn't really make much sense to me that the U.S. would build secret laboratories in those areas. It just doesn't really jive, So, like I said, I was just kind of really, really skeptical, at least of the map. So I just kind of said, okay, we'll see where this goes. Well, fast forward a day or so, and I see someone saying that this is an old story, that it was circulating in at least in Eastern Europe, and supposedly was propaganda coming out of Russian sources. So now I'm thinking, okay, that may or may not be the case, but it's curious that I've never heard of this before, and it's not made its way to U.S. circles prior to this. Considering the events over the last 2 years, the U.S. having secret bio research laboratories in different countries, you kind of would have thought that would have percolated up, bubbled up a little bit. One would think that conspiracy theory like that would have made the rounds. Now, I try to keep up with those kind of things, as I've told you guys in the past, many times. That's something that I pay a lot of attention to, because, as you hopefully have learned, over the past couple of years, I guess, the difference between a conspiracy theory and the news is only about 6 months. So, it may even be a much shorter time frame these days. So, well, imagine my shock face when, sure enough, we begin to see this story taking form and getting some legs underneath it this week. It began when another source, somebody who I actually happen to know personally, posted a shot from the State Department's website. I don't remember if it was from the main State Department or an embassy or whatnot, but it was indeed detailing that the U.S. had been working in cooperation with the government of Ukraine on what they called biological defense laboratories. And it explained that 2 labs had been built in Ukraine to study local virus outbreaks and be, prepared for biological and chemical weapon attacks, those kind of things. Well, and then those documents were pulled down within a few hours of seeing that. I guess that this source had gotten this information and posted it from somewhere else, and people highlighting that and that starting to go around made them take that down. So, this is starting to smoke a little bit here. We're starting to see, it started to pique my interest a bit more. So, and then, and I'm unclear of the timing of when this actually, what came first. I just saw sort of reports of it. It may have been fairly simultaneous, or just within a very short time frame. The Russians announced to the world that they wanted an explanation from the U.S. about these laboratories. And very shortly after that, Victoria Nuland, who is some sort of Secretary of State or Undersecretary of State of Diversity or something like that, I don't know, some Biden administration flunky, announces that indeed the U.S. had these labs in Ukraine, and that now we were very much concerned that the Russians may get those labs and launch some form of attack. Well, of course, this hit Gab and hit some other alternative sites pretty hard, and people started kind of, making a big deal about it. And within hours, this was disavowed by Jen Psaki, who explained that we didn't have these labs, and this was just some Russian propaganda, and that it was being used to lay the groundwork for a Russian chemical attack or false flag attack, something like that. It's just all so tiresome, folks. And this is basically where we're at this point. However, this morning the Russians asked for the United Nations to have a meeting where they would formally ask the United States to explain these labs. At the time of recording this, I do not have an update on that, so I'm not exactly sure what has happened there. And this is in conjunction with a very cryptic tweet that the Kremlin put out saying that Friday evening would be something glorious for the world. So I'm not really sure what they have planned. By the time you listen to this, who knows? Maybe you'll never get to listen to this because we're all gone. I don't know. It's a crazy time. Thankfully, I think people are seeing right through the BS. And, my normie friends hit the roof when they started seeing this stuff. I got a flurry of text messages saying, did you see this? Holy crap, what are they doing over there? I love these guys. They're my friends from a very long time back. I've known all these guys for more than 20 years. Uh, and but I'm the guy that is way out in front on these kinds of things. So I had to tell them, yeah, this has been going around for a while already. Uh, oh yeah, and this is not a setup by the Russians. This is a setup by Globo Homo, so they could launch a false attack in the Ukraine on civilians and blame it on the Russians, just like they did in Syria. You guys recall that, right? Remember when those Syrian villages were supposedly hit by the evil Assad government, and it was chlorine gas attacks? You guys remember that? And then the UN sent in some researchers. I guess it was the UN, it was some international, WMD monitoring group or what have you. Sent in researchers, and they said, "Oh, this is totally confirmed, guys. We're super serial about it." And then NATO went to war to help kill ISIS and the bad Syrians. You guys remember that, right? And then a few months later, the investigators come back and said, well, maybe that was just residual chemicals on the ground or something from something else, or maybe really wasn't as bad. Not necessarily a chemical attack. And then a few months after that, it was like, yeah, nah, we think that may not have been a chemical attack at all. And on and on and on until finally they basically said, yeah, we think the Syrians might, anti-Assad factions might have just spread some chlorine around and faked the whole thing. I'm sure some people, were probably overwhelmed by fumes or something like that, so I don't want to discredit completely the casualties. Some people might have been hurt, but I think it's been pretty well established at this point that was a hoax. And the problem with all of that was it was well after the West had gone in heavy and just bombed the shit out of the Syrian government. And it was really only slowed down and stopped because the Russians sent in what they called peacekeepers. And when there was fear that NATO may accidentally bomb some Russians, the campaign got dialed back and became more about killing ISIS than a thinly veiled attempt to get rid of Assad. And you start to maybe see some parallels here. I hope so, because I don't think it's very hard to see. I think it's pretty clear what's going on. But what we have to decide is who is actually the source of this. We are really confronted with the possibility that it could be either side in this conflict. It could be the Ukrainians and their Globo masters that are going to lay the groundwork and then pull the same job in some poor Ukrainian village that they did in Syria. And then they blame the Russians and then NATO, or really it will probably become more likely a UN operation. They will step in and they'll declare that, the UN's going to enact peacekeepers into the area to stop this before it gets further out of hand. And there will be more calls for condemnation on Russia and calls for more sanctions and things like that. This could very well be the scheme of the Ukrainians to, drag everyone into a wider conflict. We know, of course, that the money will come from the U.S., but we would more likely see like African peacekeepers or maybe Malaysians, something like that. It will be nations that have no skin in the game, brought in to patrol this kind of buffer zone between the Russians and Ukrainians. And that's assuming that the Russians don't tell everyone to go pound sand, and that if you stick your nose in here, we'll tear it off too. We just don't know. It's starting to lean more and more like this because, like I said, we're seeing other things from the Ukrainians that indicate that that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to drag more people into this. Today they were talking about, we're afraid that the Russians may launch a terrorist attack against Chernobyl or this other nuclear plant that they have. It's really starting to get out of control. And the problem is that the Russians, as we've noted, are not exactly steamrolling along here, and additional forces coming into the fight on the side of the Ukrainians may be enough to turn this against them. Now, I don't think that's something they want to face the possibility of. I think we're in a very dangerous time right now if this scenario is accurate. Very soon we could see that chemical attack or that fake chemical attack, that could set things in motion. And the other possibility is that this is indeed the Russians setting up this for their own version of the false chemical attack. They could launch a false attack of their own in an area like near the breakaway republics and use that for further action against Ukraine or Russia in conjunction with China, against the U.S. in conjunction with China. Or they could simply use it as a justification for ramping up the violence in the assault on Kyiv, playing on this message that they have to do whatever it takes to end the war quickly, to bring, this rogue Ukrainian government to heel. Now, I'm going to leave that open for you to decide which one of these scenarios you think is most likely. There are no innocent parties involved in all of this, so it's entirely possible that any of this could play out, some combination of it. There could be multiple factions working here, and we're just going to have to watch it and see, what's going on, see how it plays out, and we'll give commentary where it's due. Whatever happens, one thing is for sure, Globo Homo is going full tilt against the Russians in an all-out effort just short of military action to cancel the Russians. Okay, everyday Russians are feeling the heat from this as Western banking has shut them down. Big tech has gone against them. It's insanity. We're even seeing, Russian restaurants in New York City being targeted. I mean, what the hell do those people have to do with anything? Nothing. Average Russian citizens, they can't use credit cards and do any kind of banking outside of Russia. Or maybe some Asian countries. I think they don't have any problem in China. Maybe Malaysia, maybe some of the Indonesia, those kind of things. We haven't really heard any kind of problem from that region, but it's mostly Russian expats living in Western or like old Eastern Bloc countries, and they're running into problems getting money unless they have some kind of local banking account. Now, Russia is retaliating by blocking off exports, as in they are not going to export hardly anything to the West. This is going to be a problem, and we're already seeing the price increases in fuel costs that, while they were already happening prior to the invasion, are being used at least as an excuse to spike, fuel costs sharply. I mean, everybody's aware of this. Everybody's complaining about this, right? And this is being used to blame the Russians for inflation and all of the, the crippling cost of fuel. It's not the truth, but the truth left out years ago and hasn't been back around since. So this is the Biden administration's out for all of these problems that they've caused. Now, the fallout from this is kind of twofold. Russia produces a significant amount of the world's fertilizer, so commercial farming is going to be taking a hit on this. Either crop yields are going to be lower, or the cost of alternative fertilizers and fuel is going to push food prices through the roof. And in addition to that, Ukraine produces a very large supply of grain for Europe and Africa. And since those crops are most likely going to be impacted, you can expect downstream effects from this. Already we're seeing some reports from African countries that they're talking about food shortages, which, can turn into famines. And it means they might be competing for sources in other parts of the world that they weren't before. And that's going to drive prices through the roof. Like we said, you're starting to see a trend here, I hope. Bottom line, net is that you need to have your mindset on putting away additional storage food and be ready for this to be lasting at least until the next winter. And if not, this time of the year next year. This is not going to be over very quickly, and I think it's going to have some long-term ramifications. So be ready for it, be prepared for it, and be thinking about that over the next few weeks. I would advise you to make some Costco runs if you can. And this should all, have you all fired up and ready to unload on Putin and his evil scheme to take over the poor Ukrainians, which I guess is why Facebook and Twitter have temporarily suspended banning people who call for violence against Russia and Putin. We have to have our 2 minutes of hate, I guess, after all, to let off that rage in an approved and proper direction. We can't have people thinking, too much about who is really at fault here and who the fingers should really be pointed at. Like I said, it's all so tiresome, folks. It's all so tiresome. Well, that's all I got time for this week. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership. Like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next episode.